until it's absolutely necessary. And I think I've just been putting off buying a desk, thinking, oh no, we'll go back to normal.
Yeah.
I
So,
need to get a desk.
so you and all of your team are working from home at the moment, are you?
Absolutely, everything. Yeah, we were already a remote company. I mean, you save money where you can, so
Yeah.
we were already built for this reality. Our clients were not, so
Yeah.
so that changed things in how we work. But we're going back to normal as an organization in terms of client work as well in now, and hopefully that will keep going.
Awesome. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the last segment of day 5, which is focused on, excuse me, goal 10, which is reduced inequalities. I'm very, very honored to introduce you all in the hub to Bio. Bio is someone whose work I got to hear of sort of towards the tail end of last year. And ever since I have heard of this wonderful human being, I have just been so inspired by all the things that she does. So I thought it would be fitting to give her the appropriate introduction that recognizes all of the work that she has done. So let me just pull that up for you because I don't want to miss any important bits. So, first and foremost, Bio is the founder of Do It Now Now. Bio, how would you class Do It Now Now?
Oh, we call it an open innovation organization with an aim to bring together a lot of different stakeholders for the benefit of Black people who are typically we're typically on the outside of those conversations and not at the table. So, social enterprise, nonprofit, open innovation organization.
I love it. I love that description. So, if I may, you founded Do It Now Now in 2016 in response to the gaps in support and support that was available to Black innovators building tech companies and social enterprises across UK and Africa. The initiatives that Bio developed for Do It Now Now have led to awards by both Harvard and Oxford University business schools for her work to create and foster opportunities for underserved communities. And I think that in itself is such a testament to this specific goal that we're talking about. So this is why I just felt you were so fitting to be the person to talk about this. Prior to setting up Do It Now Now, Bio was a social policy researcher at the London School of Economics, where her work garnered press coverage, including being quoted by the former Prime Minister David Cameron. Bio has also been a grant awarding judge for USAID, entrepreneurship program mentor of the Tony L. Melu, did I say?
Alumalu.
Illuminu
Yeah.
Foundation, and designed the UK's first ever enterprise support program for women of color, the BAME Female Founder Incubator for Hatch Enterprise. She's also recently the diversity and inclusion consultant at Google for Startups UK and a fellow and included VC as well as the Royal Society of Arts. So two more. In 2018, Bio was named as one of the most influential women in social entrepreneurship in the UK by NatWest Bank and has worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in 2019, Bio was chosen as one of the top 100 most influential BAME leaders by the Financial Times and Inclusive Boards. Wow. How do you have time to do all of these things, ladies? So fantastic.
Um, no, it's one of those things that I don't really recognize how it all stacks up until I'm being introduced somewhere. So yeah, it's been a really fortunate career so far, and a difficult one too. I'm not saying it's any of these things have come easily, and I'm not even saying that they somehow make up for the difficulty that is necessary in trying to do the work that I do. Um, but it does mean that people take me more seriously when I enter rooms and say that something is wrong and it needs fixing.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about the inspiration behind Do It Now Now.
Um, so I started a tech startup while I was at university because I was studying English literature and it meant that I had 4 hours of lectures a week. So I had basically nothing to do most of the time and just thought, oh, let me start this thing that I recognize as a problem at my university. And it just so happened to be a tech startup. I had no idea of that language or anything. Um, and it was successful actually. I had 2 offers to buy it. I had it was successful, But I didn't know that at the time because I had no comparison notes. I didn't know anyone really that was working in the same space, and the people that I did know weren't exactly forthcoming with their information.
Mhm.
So I was left isolated and completely unsupported. My university did try to help me. There were lovely people like Tony Coyle, who I'll never forget, who did so much work to help me kind of think through things. But even he wasn't that, he wasn't startup oriented. He was running a business school, so he wasn't exactly the right person to help me for it. But there were so many things that I wish I had known. And because I didn't know, I quit my startup thinking I had failed at everything. And only a couple of years later did I realize how successful it was, what I was building, what I could have done with it if I had kept at it. And that I could have been retired at 30 and living in Bali and sipping Mai Tais, I suppose.
Yeah.
But not saying that I would choose that life now, primarily because I'm allergic to alcohol. But started thinking about the life that I could have led if I had opportunity and access to information. And it started from the perspective of me, which most things start from. You think about what your problem is, what you need solving, what the world could give you, what the world owes you, or if you're less self-centered, what you could give the world. And I was working as a researcher at the London School of Economics, and I was very interested in it. I was very passionate about it. Uh, but it opened my eyes to a world where there were groups that were being invited into consultancy with government departments. There were opportunities that were accessible, but Black people didn't seem to be in those rooms. I was one of two Black people in my department. Um, and my department was very kind and they were lovely people, are lovely people. But it was just very clear to me that there was a diversity issue, and that language wasn't existing then. But it just felt off. It just felt weird. Um, and I've said this a few times recently because I've started to be asked about misogyny and the intersection between misogyny and racism within the tech space, within the social entrepreneurship space, within the activism space and campaigning space, because what we do kind of intersects all of those spaces.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, I didn't understand the question properly because as a Black woman, I just exist. I don't really know if you're being racist, if you're being misogynistic, or if you are being legitimate in your query. So I'm just existing. But I've started to kind of put language to it, uh, in that there have been many instances in building Do It Now in seeking to plug those holes so that other people don't experience the misgivings and kind of trepidations and debilitative kind of circumstances that have stopped my growth and my success in many different areas, and have the opportunity to grow and really be the best version of themselves and be the best entrepreneur and bring their best solution to the table, and have the opportunity to bring that best solution to the table and the support to grow it. So that was the big kind of, I suppose, Copernican realization of like, I need to do something, because if I, with all the privilege that I have of my education, my background, whatever, I can't get these things happening, then what to think of someone who doesn't have those tick boxes. Um, so that's how it started. And then shortly after, I started thinking, this is a Black problem across the world, because
Mhm.
across the world, Black people tend to be on the bottom end of the scale of the like ladder. So naturally, we started thinking about diaspora, and
Mm.
then also Africa, and eventually we looked at how do we support Africans in terms of the tech space, because like I said, tech entrepreneur, access to London's tech ecosystem, it made it very easy to land on that as the lowest hanging fruit for how we support Africans remotely. Um, and then in terms of the work that we do in the UK, it's very much social entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship, and also activism and campaigning. So it's a lot more varied in the UK. Again, lowest hanging fruit. Where are our connections? What can we do?
Mhm.
What are we good at?
Absolutely. And I think, some of the things you already said are so powerful. Like, for example, a lot of this sort of stuff is a tick box exercise, because it is, in my own personal experience, the same way I have seen these inequalities as well. So much like you, I'm born in Africa, I grew up there. And then when I came here, like you, or many of us who get to come to London and live in England, we have the opportunity and privilege to do a lot more than maybe what our peers or our counterparts back in Africa can do. So advocacy is so important. And it kind of brings me to my next question, which was often when we look to solve problems, we are trying to address specific things that we have seen, right? So could you kind of dive into, at that time when you were thinking or in the process of starting Do It Now, what were the prevalent things that you were seeing a lot of, if in almost tangible examples?
Um, in the Africa context specifically?
Either or, whichever, any observations are welcome.
Sure. So, when it comes to um, the UK, I started so we built our first proposition, which was how do we get more Black people to become social entrepreneurs? Because again, we're very, very focused on lived experience. Because I am very passionate about ensuring that people with lived experience of problems are empowered to solve those things. Because it doesn't mean to say that if you have not experienced those things, you can't solve them, but it does mean to say that the people who experience those things should also have the opportunity to solve them. And that's why we focus on that end. And I just kind of ended up in a space where we were trying to engage people in the conversation of how do you start a social enterprise, what are you passionate about, what do you want to do. And there was a lack of understanding of life outside of exist. There was a lack of ambition generally. Of course, there were anomalies in the people that we engage with, but there was a lack of ambition in seeing what the world could be because of a single person's input. And it's something that's prevalent across underserved communities or across poorer communities. You're just so focused on living through today and existing through to the next month and just kind of overcoming whatever hurdles are immediate in front of you, that it's very difficult to think of a world that is made better because of you. And it was heartbreaking. It was highly problematic because I don't know if you're familiar with Afrofuturism as a concept, but the idea being that Black people need to be seen in the future, in terms of art and in terms of science fiction and all of these things. It's a very creative enterprise primarily in the way that it's been spoken about. But then there are people like Ada Paris who talk about kind of futurism from the Black perspective, which is really interesting. So what we started to do was kind of look at that inability to see ourselves in the future, to see ourselves making the future, and how we could ensure that people could engage in that way, in a beneficial way. So the line, kind of the kind of company line that we used to kind of toe at the time, which we stopped using it so much. I don't believe it's on the website somewhere, but it's not the thing that we kind of go out and say anymore. Just because we have other things now that are shorter. uh, but the line used to be something along the lines of, we believe that the innovations that are going to contribute greatly to the development of our world are trapped in the hearts and minds of people that are so under supported and under resourced that they cannot bring those things to fruition. That's a paraphrase. It's not the right thing, but it's the right sentiment. Of people are so overworked, so under supported, and so unaware of what they could possibly do, that the things that are going to build our world and make our world a better place are not able to see the light of day, because those people are just, you don't have to be a genius to have a good idea, and you don't have to be a genius to bring that good idea to fruition. You just need access. You need people. You need people that are willing to help you and guide you. And it was that kind of sentiment that really spurred my passion for Do It Now, in that we now use the lines empowering Black people everywhere and the future needs us all. We started using together we can. But those three things really talk about what it means to place Black people at the center of a conversation where the future exists with us, not despite us. So that's where Do It Now kind of centers.
No, and I think that it's really heartwarming to hear that, because it's one of the sentiments I would have, just not as well articulated as you did, but you know, you see it in all corners of the world. There are solutions that exist, but the empowerment to get those people to mobilize them is where the biggest gap is. So with Do It Now and the focus on Africa, tell us a little bit more. Then, how did the operations expand, and then what were the sort of programs you developed and delivered?
So, well, when it comes to translating from, so we started in the UK.
Mm,
So when we started thinking about, and we started in the UK from an Africa's perspective. So it was Africa diaspora, engaging Black people and people that are passionate about Africa to create enterprises that were going to benefit Africa. So we always had that Africa focus. It's only actually in the past 2 years that we've kind of had a Black people in the UK building things in the UK for UK people element to our work. But that kind of, the diaspora is a could be a beacon of hope to support African enterprise, to support African development, was the kind of underlying bedrock of a lot of the things that we were doing. So when in 2017 I then decided I went full time on Do It Now, and I gave myself a year to figure out what we could do in Africa. So I moved to Nigeria with a view to go and tour Africa, the six major tech countries that everyone talks about, and speak to tech entrepreneurs and really understand what they need and all of that stuff. That plan fell through rather quickly. One, I didn't have enough savings to make that happen. Two, there were so many partnerships that I tried to make happen that just fell through constantly, and it was horrible. Actually, it was a really terrible experience work wise, just trying to make things work and constantly being hit with a no, or just like we can't fund that, or more commonly, the answer was, we'd love to do this, but the person that makes the decision is based in London, because EMEA, the person that makes the Africa decision, is usually based somewhere in Europe, or more typically in London. So I just kept thinking, why did I move back here if everyone that I need to talk to is in London? But one of the key things that we did was in move. So I started that with the UK side of things because I wanted to explain that we had programs that we were running, and my first port of call was to try and see how well those programs translated to
mm,
an African context. So using Nigeria as a kind of microcosm of the African experience of entrepreneurship, I started doing all of our programs in tech hubs, in Workstation, Ventures Platform, all the big ones in the country. And it was kind of amazing. No, it was amazing because there were so many things that I just hadn't thought of. Like email wasn't a big thing at the time. It's more of a big thing across Africa now, but
mm,
the idea of like newsletters and sales funnels through those kinds of mechanisms was just, anyway, it was just so many things that were being done so differently and so much more effectively across those tech hubs that I was going to than the things that I was teaching to London entrepreneurs. So when I started looking at what was necessary, it was clear that there were already the the business teaching. The generalist business teaching was already there, because I was going in as someone that had been doing this really well in London, was going in and being like, they're much further along than we are actually as to what we're teaching and what's expected and the conversion and all that stuff in terms of sales and understanding social media and being able to bootstrap really easily and be more effective and all of that stuff. It was really exciting to know that. But considering that, I was like, so if generalist information isn't what's needed, so they don't need 100 new incubators, um, they don't necessarily need a bunch of diaspora to come back and like say, this is how I built my business, because they're
mm,
probably building something just as good or maybe even better.
yeah,
So it was more like, where do we sit as an international organization based on the fact that our base is in London? Where do we sit in our ability to support these entrepreneurs and ensure that they have the space to actually create things? And so over that year, which turned into more about 6 months of work there, I realized that the gap was that they didn't have the easy connections to the people that had power over the way that the ecosystem was being built.
yeah,
So I moved back to London with a view of creating something that would ensure that there was a really easy connection between those stakeholders. So that, again, going back to the open innovation aspect of our work, it's about bringing stakeholders together and being a sort of brokerage organization so that we can ensure that we're matching the right people to the right opportunities. So Google Cloud credits, AWS credits, the ability to speak to an international lawyer, the ability to be introduced to funds across the early stage, but also the types of people that you'll want for your Series A and Series B, just so you can start building those networks. Because as anyone who's even remotely interested in tech and investment and any of that stuff will know, it is all a network game. It is
Oh, yeah.
disgustingly a network game.
Yeah.
So if you don't know the right people, you're pretty much screwed. And while it doesn't mean that you can't build a business, it just means that your ability to build the business that you wanted to build, or a business that will be huge and massive and hire thousands of people as opposed to 50 people. Not 50 people isn't bad, 50 people is great. But when you know that there is a ceiling to your growth, you build smaller. And that's what we were seeing. People were starting to build things without the view. This was in 2017, so thankfully things have changed a lot with a lot more corporations coming into the space. But people were building things with a view of never really expanding beyond their country
Mm.
because it was just so difficult, or expanding internationally because it was just so difficult. But with the corporations like Google coming in and Microsoft and a bunch of other people have started really working to kind of the new kind of scramble for Africa as tech. So a lot of people are coming in to start to see what they can do. Um, it's building quite nicely to support African tech entrepreneurs to the future.
Absolutely. And I think that's the most promising thing that a lot of people don't realize about Africa, that it is truly becoming a hub for tech innovation. I mean, sometimes when I tell people, our mobile payments tech came from Africa, and people are like, no, it didn't. It came from England. I'm like, no, it really didn't. So, you know, that warms my heart. I'm sure it warms yours. But again, something that you and I are both passionate about, but again, you speak on it more eloquently than I do, is again, we still see problems in that space when it comes to also the founders who set up some of these companies. So I'd let you speak about it, but I know that there's a perspective on that as well.
I'll use that example because that's actually one of the examples that I tend to talk about to show the disparity. So mobile payments were very important to the development of financial inclusion in Africa, and had been for I think about 10 years,
Yeah.
of like people moving in this space and in this area. And I mean, it was just this African thing that people largely ignored outside of Africa, and just kind of treated it as like this primitive technology that was used on feature phones and just not a big deal, nothing to pay attention to. And it's become the bedrock of the entire fintech industry, and it's credited to a bunch of English people who 6 years after it came out, that it was launched and it was working, 6 years later, uh, it started becoming popular in the UK. And that's incredibly disappointing, because I mean, we could have had those innovations 6 years earlier if people just paid attention and trusted and believed when we talked about the innovation that was happening in Africa, and just decided to pay its attention. Which is why I talk about the venture capital space. Like when we talk about investment and all of those things, it kind of it sometimes comes across as like hoity-toity or like rich people stuff. But if you don't really consider it, you won't realize that those people are deciding what your future looks like, because they're the ones that are funding things. So
Yeah.
if they're not paying attention to who is out there and what innovations exist, and really giving everybody a shot to build things that make a difference in the world, your future will look like a very specific person's experience, where
Yeah.
you are at the periphery of that experience, which is our big mission at Do It Now, is to ensure that Black people can be in the center of that conversation as well, in the center with everybody else, not just kind of out on the outside looking in. So that comes across in a number of different ways, with the way that, for instance, of the 458 deals, funding deals that were done across Africa, mind you, the entire continent makes up, I think, less than, if I feel like I'm making this number up, but it is just as drastic or just as dramatic. But it's a minuscule percentage of the amount of investment that's done in the British tech ecosystem every year,
Yeah.
is the entire. African tech ecosystem. When you think about the capita, the space, the population, the deprivation, the need, it's just quite, it's honestly just terrifying when you really look at the amount of deprivation people are facing within that space. But just I think specifically to what we've kind of been focusing on recently in terms of the way that we communicate this is the education barrier, or the education kind of not barrier, excuse me, but the kind of tick box that is being applied across the way that people fund. So like I said, like we agreed earlier, venture capital is a networking game, and
Yeah.
venture capital determines who is building the future of the
Right.
entire world. So if venture capital is a networking game and they're deciding the future, then only a very specific group of people are allowed to build the future. And those people are typically uh, across the world white, and have gone to, and specifically in Africa, have gone to one of 7 universities.
Yeah.
Like, so that is just, or have worked in either the US, UK, or France for over 5 years. So it's a very specific experience that they're bringing to the table. And while it is not a cardinal sin to be well educated, and neither is it to have worked in a major market across the world, it is a problem when the vast majority of the people that are being funded to build African innovations are those people. Like, I'm one of those people. I don't shirk away from that. That is a reality. But I think we need to make sure that we are actively opening doors to other, to in what is the term, indigenous groups, so the people who actually live there and make it happen, and make, and are the people that are primarily going to make these are going to use these applications. uh and I think there is no easy answer to it, but I do think it's something to be very, very cognizant of as we continue to shape what is going to be the strongest tech ecosystem in about 20 years. We need to know that we're going in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think, when we talk about at a global level reducing inequality, or we talk about that goal specifically, I think you described it so well, right? Like venture funding determines our future. So there has to be a level of equality that we're also seeing, not just in how the money moves around or where it goes to, but also that we back homegrown talent. And I think that is something that sometimes gets missed. I mean, I'll share some of my own personal experiences as an investor when I've gone out to Kenya and kind of, really investigated, okay, what's growing here? What are they developing? A lot of the founders who I was told you should go and speak to this person usually came from a background that had nothing to do with Kenya. So it was actually me who's educating them about, well, have you thought of this or have you thought of that? And I'd be sitting there thinking to myself, why are you trying to solve this problem? And it goes back to your point. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is a bit of it's a bit of a tilted system which only favors a certain amount of people. So if we then reflect on the work of Do It Now, I'd love for you to share some of the successes or progresses that your work has been able to do for that cohort of people.
Oh, absolutely. So, because we focus extremely early stage, because that is the most deprived stage within the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
Our goal is really to empower founders to connect with other founders across different markets. Because when you know a founder in Kenya, and you're based in Nigeria, and you know a founder in South Africa, you know a founder in Ghana, it's a lot easier for you to understand those markets, and for you to start really understanding where your market entry is, where your opportunities are, where your partnerships could be. So building those relationships have been very important, very instrumental to the kind of thinking of the startups that we're working with, because now they can be like, okay, I'm building a fintech startup, you're building a logistics startup. In the middle of that, there's a lot of commonality.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how we can work together, and that's been amazing to see. Then we have made some really fantastic introductions to later stage funds that they're building those relationships with. Unfortunately, it's while there's a lot of qualitative stuff where people are growing and they're making some great stuff and they're feeling more confident and more able to reach out, and they're getting more traction based on the kind of tag of what we're doing, and them being chosen, I suppose, which
Mm.
is problematic in itself, because I mean, applications are not all the way objective. It's who sees the application that applies, and it's who chooses that chooses anyway. It's
Yeah,
it's not a computer that's deciding all of these things. So
absolutely.
anyway, so they're getting more opportunities to understand key things that, like for instance, not knowing the best way to organize your finances, to organize your reporting, and all of those really important things to an investor as early on as possible will set you back years. So the ability to understand that as early as possible through our program means that they can set up for the future in the best way possible. And again, making those introductions to investors, making those introductions to other founders, and making those opportunities that we've given them to get credits. And so we've given about 60,000, I think it's $80,000 worth of credits to them now, over the past few months. And we have more to give. So we're kind of waiting for them to ask for them, because obviously you have to, they run out after a certain number of years. So
Of
you
course.
have to kind of wait for the right time to ask for them. So we
Yeah.
have more allocated to us that we can give them because of the relationships that we brokered with corporations. So it's about just making our KPI for them is just making them their lives easier.
Yeah.
It's not so much they've raised, because
Yeah.
that's a whole other kettle of fish
Yeah.
completely.
Tell me about
But
it.
it's just about making it as easy as possible for them to grow and for
Yeah.
them to stabilize, and that's what we're doing really well, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think like the fact that you focus on early stage is so important because for anyone who's probably not founded a startup, they will not be able to appreciate that your early stage is probably where you, I mean, you said it so well, you need most of the support because if you don't have the right network or you don't have the right advisors, you kind of do what I or you have done, which is like, oh, this isn't for me. I'm just going to leave it and not pursue. And I think also the amount of mentorship you can give somebody at an early stage, like you said, just sets them up for how they will grow the business and how ready they are to tackle that, you know, the pace at which they want to move because they've done a lot of the groundwork. So as much as I know you say it's qualitative outcomes, those are the most important qualitative outcomes because they form the baseline of how these businesses are forming. So coming on to talking a little bit more about goal 10 and it's like, you know, the sustainable development goals, how do you feel that, you know, your work with Do It Now supports not just goal 10 but, you know, other different types of goals? Because, you know, you've touched on so many of the other topics, but it'd be good for people to hear from your perspective.
Sure. So like I said, we focus a lot on people with lived experience. We focus on people who are typically not in the purview of the types of organizations that we broker relationships with to support the cohort of people that we focus on. So it's really about ensuring that everyone, there is no baseline that everyone kind of starts at, because everyone starts at different stages and is experiencing different challenges. So what we try to do is ensure that we're meeting everybody exactly where they are and helping them get to where they want to be, whether that feels like something that we would call a lifestyle business, which is just something that's small and able to support you, or if that's a scalable enterprise. We want you to be able to get to where you want to be and do it in a way that feels real and authentic to you, while also meeting the fullest potential of the setup that you've agreed for yourself to attract. So that's kind of where we sit in within it. It's really because so much of our work is in that space. It feels odd to claim it as what we do because it's the underlying factor of everything.
Yeah.
It's because, I mean, look, we focus entirely on Black people. We prioritize women. We prioritize, one of our programs is entirely focused on LGBTQ, non-binary and women. We prioritize, we give scholarships to people that are unemployed. We give scholarships to people that have not been to university. We give scholarships to different kinds of people that don't typically get access to the types of things that other organizations and some, well, because of our specific focus, people tend to get access to what we do. But people that don't tend to get access to the type of work that we do in general, we make it our business to create things that are very, very specifically for them. So it's very much the underlying aspect of everything. But I think the goal that we actually more, and I know I'm going to say it and then it's going to be the wrong number, but it's either number 4 or number 8, quality education.
It's 4. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just know that because we spent a whole week talking about goals. If you asked me a week ago, I probably wouldn't have known.
So that's the one that we kind of really hold ourselves to, because that's the way that we communicate. That's the mechanism through which we reduce inequalities. It's about giving people access to tools and resources, and giving them the ability to retrain and re-energize and re-understand and rebuild their careers and their opportunities from the perspective of gaining more access to information. So that's where we kind of are. In terms of like the goals themselves, I think, because we're part of this organization called Catalyst 2030, so we are that that organization is about catalyzing for the goals, and ensuring that we are meeting the goals not by 2094 but hopefully 2030, as
Yeah,
was well, I don't know what it's like in a post-COVID world if that 2094, oy, I mean the climate change goal might be on.
maybe accelerating.
But,
Things around. But no, I think you raise a fantastic point, because um, quality education is something we even learned this week, speaking to so many speakers, is kind of a core tenet of all the other goals. Because when you're kind of educating people, whether that's, you know, giving them a mentorship or giving them an apprenticeship, or even actually, like you said, scholarships, go to university, all that sort of stuff, it 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 reshapes who they are as a person. Like, if I give you an anecdote of one of the speakers we had, she lived in Burma and then came to the UK to study accountancy. But because of the exposure to this type of education and the environment, she was able to go back and, you know, turn a mining town into a tea farming town. So, like,
mm,
you know, education is so important. But something I also wanted you to maybe comment on or speak on is also, um, from your experience, what would you say is the, you know, like, level or quality of education that's available to Africans in Africa?
Oy, oh, it's so varied. Well, it is everywhere in every country.
Yeah,
But I think the most telling, and so when one of the things I researched when I lived in Nigeria, was like, so I said that youth unemployment was the focus of like how do that's why we're in tech, to solve the youth unemployment problem.
yeah,
But obviously connected to the youth unemployment problem is a skills gap. It's education. It's what can we do to ensure that the youth that are there are actually fit for purpose for these organizations that would ensure the future sustainability of the country and so on, or
yeah,
the country that they're in. um, and we found that the research, and obviously being very research led myself, we found that the research said that of the 12, so according to like corporations that were surveyed, they look for 12 different things to say that a student is up to par of what is needed in 21st century role. And those are things like formal English, writing and speaking, uh, the ability to communicate well over email, website proficiency, just like the ability to navigate a website and gain information, and just Google basically well, and for the purpose of understanding and getting a really balanced view of information, things like that. There were 12 of them. I don't remember all of them at this time, but I do remember that the research said that most universities, the curriculum o- only catered for 7 of them out of the 12. So even if you graduate at the best level, uh, you were still not at the level that was necessary.
yeah,
And this was obviously it's research, so it wasn't highly funded research because it's sociological research in Africa. So it's not the type of thing that gets a lot of funding. So
yeah,
they didn't go to every single university,
yeah,
but the universities that they went to, those are the people that was the curriculum that they were met with. And it was extremely disappointing, not for nothing. It was really disheartening that you'd find students trusting the education system, that if they work hard, they study hard, they graduate well, they'll get a job. But then you find that students graduate and are left without a job for over 5 years, uh, because the university failed them pretty much,
mm,
and the corporations don't trust the degrees that they're getting. So this the skills gap is a behemoth to try and overcome. So it is worrisome that the education system across Africa is not fit for purpose for the growth that we're trying to see across Africa, and that's extremely problematic. There have been some really interesting solutions that have come up over the years to kind of meet that. So Moringa School is one, Andela is another one that has unfortunately kind of fallen from
Yeah.
public from grace and
Yes.
fallen from public opinion over the
Yeah.
past couple of years. But there are more that are trying to kind of match that, kind of build, I don't know, bridges or shaky rope ladders over a chasm to make that happen, so that people have the ability to parlay whatever it is they have gained into a career. But there is a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of brings me on to one of the first questions from the audience, which is um, when we look at, so this is coming from a corporate perspective. So they say, as corporations, what can we do more of to enable that skill gap in Africa? That's a big question.
Oy.
Yeah.
So
I
okay.
told you everyone's come prepared with big questions.
I like big questions, actually. Makes it's good. It's fun to think about the big things and then actually put work to them. So thank you for the question. Honestly, it's not actually it, it's not that difficult, because there are some corporations that are doing some really great things already. An easy example is Grow with Google.
Mm,
It's their global program that teaches people of any walk of life how to use Google products. Of course, it's self-serving, because they want to have the largest user base. So they're teaching people how to use their products well. But they don't just cover their products. It's general digitization skill sets that they're
mm,
building there. So it's about figuring out what your ease is. I mean, we've been asked by many corporations to design something with their ease in mind. So what they have available to them. Our previous tagline was repurposing corporate resources. That was what we used to say. But
mm,
it's about figuring out what is available to you and saying, if in the same way that we said youth unemployment is what we're trying to fix, what is the lowest hanging fruit in that conversation that we can start applying what we've got. And if as a corporation you have a bunch of, I don't know, you might be a law firm, um, that's fantastic. Lawyers are needed. Lawyers are very needed. Lawyers are expensive across Africa. Being able to connect with a bunch of tech hubs and say, hey, we'd like to mentor, or if it's a if it's specifically for employment purposes, then you can build a traineeship, or like a foundation traineeship over and above the normal kind of solicitor traineeship for lower skilled or lower level or lower tier graduates, so that there is an entry point. So like in the same way that we have paralegals and things like that, there is always something that can be done. But obviously look first at what your bottom line is and what your sought impact is, and then just kind of start clawing away. And it will take some trial and error. I was once at a dinner party, and this banker had read, I don't know if you've read it, but Reni Edo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to
yeah,
White People
yeah,
About Race.
yeah. I love,
Um,
yeah.
he read it and was just really excited, and then sunk a whole bunch of money into what I think was probably one of the more ridiculously underwhelming programs of like support. And it was like, ah, I wish you'd just spoken to a lot more people before you said we're just going to sink a bunch of money into this, because that was a lot of money to sink into something that isn't going to have much impact. But
Yeah,
if you just talk to a number of people that already work in the space and what they're doing, and most corporations are quite chatty, not the corporations themselves, but the staff, especially the
yeah,
CSR teams, are quite chatty about what they're doing.
yeah.
And you can always find ways to either work together or just kind of learn from other people's mistakes.
mm,
Yeah. And most importantly, repurpose resources. I'm a huge, huge advocate of that because I believe like if we repurpose more resources, not just specifically in a region or in an industry, I just think globally we would have far less issues. So I like how you illustrated that because one of my roles in my consultancy is to do the facilitation of these sorts of partnerships. And it's really funny when they first come to you going, oh, this is what we want to do. And I'm like, okay, so what have you got to bring to the table? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, you obviously haven't thought about this. Or and I understand. It's like you said, there's not enough information out there. So, where do they start and what do they do? I do often point them in your direction when they go, we want to do something in Africa. I'm like, just go see what she's doing first, figure it out, and then let's talk about it, because it is a lot about education and helping people understand that. Um, we have a slight tangent of a question, but I quite like it. It says, "What made David Cameron talk about you in Parliament?"
Oh gosh. Okay. So no, he did not name check me.
Oh,
Let's be clear. That it wasn't like a Twitter beef that spilled into the Houses of Commons. No. So David Cameron, I think, had a family member. I think it was maybe his father who suffered from dementia or was experienced or living with dementia, and so he had a very big heart for dementia research and dementia policy, and had a very big stance on it. And in his big speech as to this is what we want to do, we had been as a team at LSE, we'd been commissioned to kind of create the foundational research that was informing that document. So that was in his speech. He quoted our work twice.
Ooh, very nice. Um, Another question from someone in Africa themselves. They say it's phenomenal how you've produced so many partnerships for Do It Now Africa. What would your advice be for people like us who are running grassroots organizations to be able to leverage some of that advocacy as well?
In terms of building partnerships for yourself, it would, if as grassroots organizations, partnerships are the most effective way of doing that, because banding together with similar organizations, maybe not directly competing or doing the same thing, depending on what exactly you're doing in the grassroots space, but finding the way I like to look at it when I kind of teach on partnerships or for how to form a partnership, it's like thinking about the Olympics. There's there's that space where all the athletics happens. You can tell I'm not into sports, but like, all the long jump and the javelin throwing, the grass and the red roads, and that bit. The main stadium, you know what I mean, the one Usain Bolt runs on, that bit. Yeah, there's lots of sports happening at the same time, but they all have the attention of that one audience, right? So you're trying to find partners that would be not running necessarily the exact same race as you, so you're direct competitors, but people who are like, you're running and then someone's doing the long jump over there, but it's all in the same space, so that you can say, hey, me, this long jumper, I'm a sprinter, there's a long jumper, there's a javelin thrower, there's a shot putter, there's a high jumper. We've all got a combined, I'm going to do this in social media terms, we've all got a combined following of 2 million people. If you give us some money, we will all post about it. That's cheaper for them typically than hiring one person with a 2 million follower count, and it also gives them more exposure. So if you look at it from those terms, it's about finding the right partners, finding and then all of you figuring out what your metrics are, because unfortunately, and it is really disappointing, that despite how much you love what you do, at the end of the day, you have to appeal to the profit making arm of whatever company you're looking to support. So even if we're saying, hey, it's good for you and your staff will love you for doing something good in the world and all of that stuff, it still has to have a reasonable commercial output for them, because they're still a profit-making business. So you kind of have to think about it from that perspective. We will get your business in front of this many people. We can promise this level of conversion. We can promise this level of follow through. We can continue to do this for a significant period of time. We can ensure that you have entry into our market in these few ways. It's very clinical. It kind of makes it suck when you think about how much you want to create impact and you have to do all of this like suddenly schmoozing with corporations, but that's how it is.
It is how it is. And, one of the things that I like with some of the mentors that I work with out there, and, some of these people are not necessarily startups. It's kind of like how you look at a bio. They're just on a mission to do something good, right? However you formulate them from a legal point of view, that's by the by. But one of the things I always say to all of them is find an advocate for your work in that organization. You
Yeah.
don't have to go and like find the CEO or, but find somebody within there, connect with them, tell them about what you do, even if it's just a few conversations. Those relationships are really what is going to drive your messaging forward. And they often tell me, oh my god, but why would they want to hear from us? And that thinking also has to break, because I always say to them, well, just try, number one, because what's the worst that's going to happen? That you're not going to hear back from them. But second of all, you'd be surprised at how happy they would be that you reached out to them, because oftentimes in these organizations everyone's kind of like head down with like blinders on. So this is always a welcome interrupt into like what they're doing. So I think finding an advocate or getting an ally in these places is also really, really important. um yeah, I think that matters. Okay, another question. um People are so funny. They're like, Bio, you do so many things, what do you do in your spare time?
What spare time? That is the answer to that
That's the
question.
answer to the question. Yeah, no,
Yeah. No, I am a self-confessed workaholic. I do not suggest it to anybody. Don't be a workaholic. It's not a good life. But I am one, so it helps because it means I really truly enjoy the work that I do. I fully enjoy it. And in the beginning, I started do it when I started Do It Now. I would find things that I loved and just make it part of Do It Now. Like some way, somehow, it would just become a part of Do It Now. And that was not the smartest thing to do, because then it means you have no hobbies. But but I mean, I remember when I first and sorry, short story. When I first thought about what Do It Now was going to be, and I was just kind of sitting with it and thinking about it and all of those things. I remember I invited 30 people to my flat in London to kind of have this meeting with them and say, hey, does you guys, I'm just going to talk you through my business idea, and then you can tell me if you want to help or not. And it was really nerve-wracking. It was the first time I'd spoke, well, the second time actually, but I was speaking to my friends about it for the first time, and I invited 30 people over. 7 people showed up, and my brother was there as well. So it was eight people and me, and I only had 6 chairs. So I really don't understand what I was doing inviting 30 people over. But we all sat down. My brother was sitting on an arm length, the armchair, like the arm of a chair, and I was sat on the floor, and I just had all of these pieces of paper around me, and I laid it out, and I think I spoke for about an hour. And I remember ending it with, so this is what I'm going to dedicate my life to. And that hasn't changed. And so it doesn't, for me, all of this work is just, I feel such like, I feel such a mandate to
yeah,
move this discussion forward and
yeah,
develop these things and build these things and keep it moving, that it's kind of impossible for me to do less.
yeah.
Plus, I have a team. I do have a team. So, there are, I'm not the only person. I do have a team.
No, but I love that you said that, because um, I think it's a lot of what all of us passion-driven entrepreneurs do, right? When we have a purpose and we have a mission and a cause, we're like full on behind it. I mean, I get the same thing as well. Like, are you ever going to stop? I'm like, no, because I actually like what I do. It's the best way I can describe it is a mandate, but also it's almost a duty, because you kind of sit there and ask yourself, well, if I don't do it, who will? Because
Yeah.
the insight that I have, the other person will not have. So, something that I always advocate for is, let's collaborate, not compete. It doesn't matter if we all pick up the same baton and, charge forward with it. Numbers are better, we're better in numbers than we are in anything
Yeah.
else. So, to all the people who are listening, if you feel inspired by what Bio is doing and you want to pick up that baton, please do, because you heard those stats. It's like what, 700 incubators across all of Africa, or
Yeah.
just
643.
across all of Africa. And how many do we have in London? Just London?
1,842.
There you go. That's just London, right? We haven't even
Yeah.
talked about like
Oh
Liverpool.
my gosh, it's so horrible.
Yeah. And it brings me nicely on to something I did want people to hear about, which was obviously AfriTech XYZ, which is the first virtual incubator that you guys have launched. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it's really exciting because it brought together a bunch of different things that we've been testing for a couple of years as to how do we ensure that we're properly accelerating the journey of African tech entrepreneurs, because the thesis is that ecosystems as nascent as the African tech ecosystem are being cobbled together by powerful players. So at the moment, it's really quite well owned by corporations. But if you don't live in a certain city, or you don't have access to the person that leads the application process, or you just don't understand, or you don't know, you don't feel comfortable writing an application, it becomes very, very difficult to access those sorts of things. And again, like we said, with founders that are educated elsewhere, outside of Africa, and founders that have been worked outside of Africa get priority. So the majority of founders that are building really great things don't get a look into the very few incubators and accelerators that do exist. So you end up having startups that kind of minimize their vision, minimize their mission, just kind of build for them and their family and their team to be like subsistent.
Exactly.
So what we've done is, through this virtual process, been able to onboard a cohort of startups, give them access to all of the, so we follow the Stephen Coltine method, which is called the 6x6 ecosystem building method. So
Yeah.
identifying 12 different parameters that a strong ecosystem has, and then taking the startup through each one of those parameters as time goes on, so
Yeah.
that they get to access to a funder, access to a lawyer, access to a tech expert, access to a tax person, access to an NGO, all of those things that are necessary for the robust building of a strong startup. And then by that value, ensuring that there is a strong pipeline to growth stage, rather than having all of these startups kind of fail and drop off because there isn't a strong early stage support system in place. So it's about giving the current tech ecosystem kind of an underlayer of support. It's
Yeah.
not competing with the existing ecosystem builders or infrastructure that exists, because we can't be there in person. We have to partner with a bunch of different people to ensure that we can broker these deals, like AWS credits and Google Cloud credits and seed legals and all of these things, to
Yeah.
ensure that it's accessible to them, where these founders of these tech hubs don't have the time because they're running a physical tech hub in Africa, which is just a different beast also itself than running one in any other country. So we get to partner with them and help them in that way as well. So it's an ecosystem support mechanism at the heart of it, that's seeking to engage everyone that works across it.
No, and I think it's wonderful. I well, that's kind of how I got to know you out of Africa, AfriTech XYZ. So I'm not going to say too much because I know there's lots of cool stuff going in there, and I'll save it for the next time you have to talk about it. But Wendy, do you have any questions? You've been
Yes,
listening.
yes. Yeah, so one of the questions which I wanted to ask you is, what do you think needs to happen, or what would you like to see happen um, to inspire more young Black people from a kind of early age to move out of the mindset of existence and more into the mindset of entrepreneurial opportunities?
So when you say early age, I'm assuming like teenagers and kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are actually some really great organizations tackling that exact problem, because we tend to focus from 18 up, just because it's a entirely different beast to kind of work with kids. But it's really just about access to role models at that point, access to trial opportunities, access to um, like the organizations that I admire in that space are just about igniting creativity and showing you that there is an entire world outside of what you think is expected of you. And once you give, and I know I was a recipient of this, once you give someone a nod, like a way to see the world as bigger than the four corners of like their existence, like mum, dad, siblings, and school, once you get to encourage them to see the world outside of that, and really put themselves in comparison to the way other people exist in different cultures around the world, it makes you realize that it kind of is enforcing a globalization mindset from very early on, which
Mm,
I think kids are doing now because of the internet anyway. Like, this is the first generation coming up now, is the first generation that has been entirely online, even more so because of the apps that are coming out every single day now, that encourage this kind of formulation of subcultures online that you don't see represented in real life. So we are living, excitingly living in an age where in a few years the people that we're seeing will all know that there is an entire world out there,
mm,
and they don't have to conform to the existence that is right in front of their eyes. So en- encouraging the people around you to engage in a wider world is probably the easiest thing, but then also enrolling them in programs that teach them about entrepreneurship, teach them about creativity and design and all of those things from very early on. The more you know, the easier it is to think outside.
I love that. And what can be done, do you think, to raise awareness of these innovation investment opportunities in Africa to venture capitalists in countries like the UK?
So we're doing a lot of that work, and thankfully it's starting to really take off because, like I said, it's a network game. It's a comfortability factor, because the way decisions are made across with investors, and it's pretty much the same thing everywhere. You as a human being have to want to work with that other human being for 10 years. So you think from the perspective of, I need to be friends with this person, I need to understand this person, I need to understand what they do, and I need to understand the market that they're in. We can help you understand the market that they're in, we can help you understand what they do, but liking the person and be wanting to be friends with this person are two things that we cannot help you with. So it's about really checking bias, and the diversity and inclusion movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the unconscious bias movement that has been taking over the tech space, the investor space for a few years, and now is just like a global phenomenon of conversation, is going to really open those doors. And for the first time, I'm seeing um, organizations in the UK, like the BAA, the UK Business Angels Association, having real panels about African investment. And it's something that you wouldn't have seen a couple of years ago, because now everyone's realizing that it was a bias thing, not an opportunity thing, and
Mm,
everyone's checking their bias at the door, which is very exciting.
yeah, yeah, I do see. I think that it's really quite incredible to see this movement and how, like, already we're seeing so many different organizations, industries coming to the table and now just acknowledging it, and yeah, acknowledging that there is an issue within a lot of industries that needs to be addressed in terms of diversity and inclusion. I think it's a really encouraging and potentially exciting time, that people are becoming open to just learning a bit more and listening a bit more to the Black community, which is a great thing. I know that your work focuses, and like you've mentioned before, there's a big emphasis on gender equality. Obviously, you have programs that are specifically focused around women and the LGBTQ community. How does that translate into your work in Africa?
Difficultly is the short answer to that, because obviously in Africa it's still illegal in quite a lot of the countries to be out. So we haven't translated that aspect of the work yet, but we are looking for opportunities to do that in a way that is safe for the people that would take part. So it's a very difficult one, but at the very least we are planning, or at least pre-COVID we were planning to launch our campaign and activism side of things, but for the general population, well, primarily focusing on women in Kenya. So we're looking for opportunities, and I'm always open to conversations, but at the moment, um, it's very difficult to see how to do that openly. Um, well, with COVID, it's now a virtual space, so we could potentially have that opportunity, but still, with the outcome being you go out and openly campaign and openly, we it's very difficult to suggest to people to put their lives at risk,
Yeah,
because they want to. It's a very difficult conversation to have, to be honest, and I it's one that troubles me a lot. But I'm hoping that we can find a solution, we can find organizations to partner with, we can find something to do so that we can shift those programs to Africa as well. But in the meantime, we're very focused on ensuring that tech entrepreneurship is as easy as possible so that we can solve the youth unemployment problem.
And what do you see in Africa in terms of, are there many, because I know tech, and we had Sonia, who was one of our other speakers, come on earlier and said, obviously the tech environment is predominantly male led. What's the appetite for women in Africa to get into the tech space?
Well, women are more entrepreneurial than men in Africa. It like extremely, like by the vast majority of women are running some kind of enterprise. It's not so much that there's like a lack of appetite, it's there's a lack of information and access. So once Instagram became a thing, uh everyone that was previously selling their cakes or their shoes or whatever, their dresses, moved over to Instagram and started selling there and started using DMs and mobile payments. And there's a high adoption rate of easily accessible technologies, but there isn't the translation to or transition that is being encouraged really from I just do this thing that happens to be online. In the same way that I didn't know I was building a tech startup, though I was. That's kind of where it is, that there isn't that leap yet of no, this is a tech startup. This is, and honestly, the same thing. We ran an incubator in London for Black women, and it was the final session, or maybe a session, the penultimate session, and it was run for women that were building social enterprises, and the premise of it was that all of them should have a plan as to how they were going to go from 200 people a year to 2,000 people a year within 3 years through the use of technology. And at the penultimate or final session, we had a tech investor, a tech for good investor, Dama from Bethnal Green Ventures, come and speak to the cohort. And she asked a question. So, how many of you are building a tech startup? And none of them put up their hands. And I was just like, all of you are building a tech startup. Literally, all of you are building a tech startup. It's a very specific like thought process of who builds a tech startup. What you think of Facebook, and you don't think of Facebook as it used to be when it very first started. You think of Facebook as it is today. You think of Google as it is today, when everything starts with an MVP. Like obviously there's coding involved, but everything starts with a much scaled back version that eventually becomes the thing that you see. I mean, Glossier is a tech startup, ASOS is a tech startup, but you don't really think about it from those terms, because you think, oh no, I just sell things online. Well, no, if you're planning on adopting some really interesting methodologies to convert people from cart to from shop window to cart to abandoned cart to communication strategies and all of that, and you're using technology to follow their journey, that's a tech startup. Like it's things that people build in without really recognizing that's what they're doing. So I think that's primarily what's happening across Africa.
Amazing. Amazing.
We have a question from the audience along the lines of what Wendy's asked, but a little bit different. They say that, or they ask, do you feel that through the work that you have done and so many others like you, that it's given women more confidence to pursue being an entrepreneur?
I'd hope so.
I think so. I would say yes.
I think in terms of, I understood that question first from the perspective of role models rather than like the actual work that we do with people in programs. In terms of our beneficiaries, yes, absolutely. That's one of our key performance indicators. Did your confidence rise? But in terms of role models, I would hope so. I would hope. I remember when I first started the company, like I said, I had that meeting with my friends, and but one of the great things about it is I've been able to see the change in my friends over the years as they've seen me kind of take this leap and kind of get to this place. And every once in a while, I just think, having not obviously not in an arrogant way, because if it was, I wouldn't be saying it so openly, but obviously in the sense of how incredible must it be for them to kind of have watched this happen and know that they could do it too, because I mean, I was literally just there with them, and I've built this thing over 4 years. Like, surely that must be like a, if she can do it, I can do it, because that's how my brain works. If I
Mm.
see someone achieve something, it's not necessarily the person hasn't inspired me, the achievement inspires me, because I just suddenly think, if that person could do it, I can do it. Why can't I do it? Of course I can do it. And then that's how my brain works. So I just think, if I had experienced the same thing of seeing someone that I was actually, yeah, I haven't in a sense, but seeing someone I am close to, kind of, or grow up with, just achieve these massive things. And I'm not saying that where we are now, well, I don't know. It's massive to some people, but there's a very long way to go. But I'm in the sense of, like, a school friend of mine has an MBE now, and is like, has s- buildings named after her and things like that. And I'm just like, if she can do it, I can do it. Like, why can't I do it? Of course I can do it. Of course, why not? It's just like one of those things that, even if that isn't an aim of mine, the possibility is suddenly in the atmosphere. And I think that's important, to kind of have the possibility in the atmosphere, because if you see someone close to you that has been able to do something, it should encourage you to at least start.
Agreed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think when we talk about role models, or we talk about like the rise in confidence, it's also evident in how many female founders you do see coming out of the continent. There are some truly fantastic brands that are run by homegrown talent, like that's come from there. And you know what, the most encouraging thing to see them do is to begin by focusing on their market. So it's like that integrity with what we're building is for this place, and then to expand that same identity globally without it changing. I think, to me, that's one of the most heartwarming things, because it
Yeah.
definitely means that whatever ecosystem they're using, it's giving them the confidence, for me personally, to maintain integrity of what they're doing. I think that is one of my biggest fears, especially when we take that mobile payments example. It's like there's so much that has to be done to support them in owning and having integrity with what they do, because otherwise, like you said, the fund can come along and things will change and the tech will change, and then suddenly it's like the reason that this whole brand was born just
Mm.
kind of disappears overnight. So it's been, for me at least, really promising to see so many female led tech startups actually begin from there. So I think that that's really, really positive. um, Another viewer asks, Bio, this is also fantastic, how can we get involved with supporting you?
Yeah.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. Allowing me to plug without being weird about it.
You
Please.
don't
I
have to,
appreciate
you
it.
don't have to let you plug anyway, but I like that they asked.
Well, it depends what you'd like to do, but the most straightforward way right now is to donate, because COVID is really kicking our butts. Like I said, I think, I don't know if it was recording it, but almost all of our, actually no, all of our contracts either got cancelled or was just indefinitely postponed. And that is one of the drawbacks of relying highly on corporates for funding,
Yeah.
uh, because obviously their priorities change quite quickly, depending on the market. So we are working really hard to build everything back up, but we just need support. So if you would like to donate to the type of work that we do across the UK and Africa, you can do so by heading to doitnownow.com/donate. And there is a page there where it explains everything.
We'll
But that
link,
would be extremely helpful.
yeah, we'll link that in the comments as well.
Thank you.
It's already done. I've popped it into the hub for them, so that's awesome. You also have another initiative. I don't know if you. So just tell me, Nisha, shut up if I'm not supposed to talk about this. But we've exchanged emails on this. I don't know if you do want to or can plug that at the moment.
Oh, the fund.
Yes.
So it's actually on the donation page as well. You can donate to the
Oh,
fund. So we're so the and it fits into this conversation quite nicely, actually, because again, COVID. So the majority of the Black population in the UK lives in the most deprived areas of the UK. So it is imperative to have social enterprises and charities, and community projects and individuals give and contribute to those areas, because they are bridging that resource gap as best as they can. People that do well from a neighborhood go back to that neighborhood and give to that neighborhood and make sure that kids can do after school programs, that mothers have mothering groups and peer groups, and the elderly are taken care of. And when something like COVID hits, and it hits people of color, and even more so Black people, especially difficultly, because things like Black people have the least amount of savings, Black people have the least amount of property, Black people have the most in low paying jobs in the country. So when you see things like furlough or self-employment support go down so drastically, it means that the people that are building those social enterprises and charities that are doing so without any funding, mind you, so they're all doing it from, I know people that have taken out payday loans to be able to pay for these things, people that are saving up so that they can do it, and people that just like set aside a monthly like salary portion of their salary to be able to run these community projects. When you see those people hit financially, it means those programs go away, not immediately, but if it doesn't recover quickly, it goes away eventually. And our fear is that in 18 months, we'll look back and we won't see any of those organizations still existing. And it's not like the government suddenly going to, especially this government, isn't going to suddenly start giving a bunch of money to deprived areas. So we're just going to see people descend into even more deprivation and even more hardship. In difficult areas, and have to live through some very difficult circumstances. So what we've done is we've started approaching some foundations, some trusts, and some funds and some corporates as well, to see if they would be interested in putting a bit of money that they've got available to them towards this fund, where we will be providing 1,000 to 3,000 pounds worth of financial support, as well as a year-long program of of training, the type of things that we do anyway, but geared very much towards them, and ensuring that they can not only have this money, but continue to build really strong, impactful things that can be sustainable over time. So not just like payday loans and their own savings, but something that can actually stand the test of time and continue to help those people for a long period of time. So we're raising that fund at the moment. And if you go onto the donation page, you can donate £1,000, and that £1,000 would go to, everything is allocated to a certain project, but that £1,000 would go to the fund.
I love that. Love that. And I think that it's just a testament to who you are, that, even when things start to go haywire, you're like, right, let's do something with this. So I love that bio.
Thank
But
you.
one final question more from us when it comes to the goal. So what are your hopes when it comes to reduced inequalities, specifically for the work that you do? So I guess it's like, what are your KPIs? Maybe the best way to quantify it is, obviously the UN defers to this as the decade of change. So
Mhm.
what would be some of your KPIs for this specific decade?
Ah, right. Well, our hope is that we want to be able to parlay off of the like like I mentioned during the answer to Wendy's question, unconscious bias, Black Lives Matter, COVID, all of this diversity and inclusion awareness. We want that to be a really strong catalyst to ensure that there's demographic representation in leadership positions across every geography and industry, across emerging markets, but that's slightly more of a given than developed markets. So
Mm,
ensure that leadership is democratized, leadership activity is democratized, so that everyone has a seat at the table, everyone can be spoken for. If we could get there in 10 years, that would solve the direct problem that I was trying to solve when I started saying do it now is what I want to do,
yeah.
because people aren't being invited to the table, and the excuses are valid. Unfortunately, it was that they're not strong enough to the businesses aren't strong enough to withstand the regulatory rigor of whatever the consultation is about. what we're trying to do is ensure that we can remove those barriers so more organizations are ready and able to take advantage of those opportunities. And we're like organizations like ours and obviously us are going to keep working so that eventually individuals, organizations, campaigners, activists, and just everybody that is a Black person across the world can look up and see, okay, this is who I am, this is where I want to be, and there are enough people to show me that it's possible, that it doesn't become an anomaly, if it is achieved.
I think that that's so important, so powerful, and it kind of, I think, concludes the whole topic so well. So I wanted to say, Bio, thank you so much. To me, you're such a social activist. I just adore the things you do, both from a fangirl point of view, but also from, an investor and, a tech enabler myself. I think the work you do is so important. So I'm glad whoever asked that question to get you to plug did, because if they didn't, I was going to anyway. And, I think for all of you who are watching, um, definitely do go and look into more of what Bio and her team have done. I think she only literally scratched the surface of a lot of the work that she's been able to do. Hopefully, for all of you young people in the audience, this has given you a great source of inspiration, but also some assurance that there are solutions out there, and there are things that we can do about goal 10 specifically, which is reducing inequalities. And yeah, just more power to you, Bio. We're all behind you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity as well. It was an enjoyable conversation.
Absolutely, 100%. Wendy, any final thoughts from yourself?
No, I just second what you say, and you've got another fangirl here as well. I'm absolutely inspired by the work that you're doing and the outlook that you have on things, and your sort of pragmatic approach to problem solving. And don't give up your day job. It's you're just doing some amazing work. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and I'm sure the communities around you and the people that you work with are truly thankful for the way that you've been able to support them.
Absolutely. And for those of you who have been asking, I will post Bio's LinkedIn. So I think people want to link into you as well. So I'll post that for you guys. I put the website and the link to donate as well. Bio, are you okay for me to pass on your email specifically for some corporate partners who might be
Yeah,
interested? So I'll
please
do
do.
that as well. And yeah, just thank you for giving your Friday afternoon to us the day before we get out of lockdown. So what a way to do it, right? So,
Gosh. Oh,
Thanks for fitting us into your extremely busy workaholic schedule. So
gosh. No, this is great. I love these breaks. Thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
absolutely. And, really hope we can do more together. And I mean, obviously, you and I we're connected and we talk about stuff all the time. So hopefully we can, pick some more of those conversations up and drive a few more things forward for you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Mario. Really
Right.
appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.